Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll look into a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with Trump's ultimatum to Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz, sending contradictory signals saying he's winding down his war on Iran, at the same time sending more Marines to unblock the strait or capture Hog Island. Joining us to describe that narrow choke point through which 20% of the world's energy passes is Robert Young Pelton, an author, filmmaker, journalist and explorer. He's the publisher of Dangerous magazine and has had first-hand perspective on the war on terror from direct contact with the world's most infamous jihadi, rebel and insurgent groups. His books include The World's Most Dangerous Places, Come Back Alive, Three Worlds Gone Mad, License to Kill, Hired Guns and the War on Terror, and his autobiography, The Adventurist. He is working on a documentary about Jared Kushner's secret deals in the Gulf, which lined his pockets. Then we'll examine how Putin is winning the war on Iran so far as he prepares for a spring offensive against Ukraine with extra revenues to pay for his war thanks to his bootlicking friend Donald Trump. Joining us is Olga Lautman, a non-resident senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, who's also the creator and co-host of the Kremlin Files podcast series, which features expert discussions on the Kremlin's internal affairs, global operations and tactics used from their hybrid warfare toolkit to destabilize Western democracies. She has a Substack newsletter covering Russia, Ukraine, Eastern and Central Europe, with a focus on Russia's intelligence operations, available at olgalautman.substack.com, where her latest articles include Trump threatens broadcasters over Iran war coverage, a move straight out of Russia, and the irony of Trump demanding NATO help in the Strait of Hormuz after years attacking the alliance. Then finally we'll assess what kind of New Year's celebration is going on in Iran, with the Nowruz holiday overshadowed by war as Iranians hunker down while running out of food and medicine under a death threat from their own government not to go outside. Joining us is Nader Hashemi, the director of the Alawi Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding and an associate professor of Middle Eastern and Islamic politics at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. A non-resident fellow at Democracy for the Arab World Now, he's the author of The People Reloaded, The Green Movement and the Struggle for Iran's Future, and Sectarianization, Mapping the New Politics of the Middle East. And before we begin with Trump having bombed 7 countries and started a war against Iran, while at home his ICE thugs terrorize and break up families, murdering American citizens in the process, the need to rid the country of the deeply unpopular Trump kakistocracy and his clown car cabinet could not be more urgent. But these crooks and criminals would do anything to stay in power, as their billionaire buddies buy up the mainstream media and the mob boss intimidates Republican politicians. Only people power can beat money power, and we need all hands on deck as we continue to do our part, delivering a daily public service, providing the facts and evidence to inform the majority of what they are up against and how to win back our country, our decency, and the respect of the community of nations. You can help save America's 250-year-old democracy by making a tax-deductible donation at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at publictruthmedia.org, and thank you. And joining us now is Robert Young Pelton, an author, filmmaker, journalist and explorer. He's the publisher of Dangerous magazine and has had a first-hand perspective on the war on terror from direct contacts with the world's most infamous jihadi, rebel and insurgent groups. His books include The World's Most Dangerous Places, Come Back Alive, Three Worlds Gone Mad, License to Kill, Hired Guns and the War on Terror, and his autobiography, The Adventurist. And he's working on a documentary about Jared Kushner's secret deals in the Gulf, which lined his pockets. Welcome to Background Briefing, Robert Young Pelton.
Hey, Ian, how you doing?
Not too bad. And Robert, you live down in the San Diego area, and apparently the Marine Expeditionary Force from Camp Pendleton has left for the Gulf. It'll take them about 3 weeks to get there. And it sort of highlights the contradictions we're hearing from Trump. On the one hand, he's saying he's winding down the war, but on the other hand, they're sending more Marines. So what is this? This is the whims of a senile man losing his mind who doesn't know what he's doing from one minute to the next? Or is there some strategy going on here?
I think I look at it from my perspective as someone that goes into various wars and has basically taught people how to fight wars and advised four stars. We are fighting an extremely traditional war against Iran. We're using attrition. We're bombing them from the air, hoping that somehow that'll change a political situation. As Iran reacts, uh, we get wrong-footed. And I say we, the country, because obviously we all suffer. And Iran is fighting a very interesting war, and I think the American news media focuses on the old sort of good guy, bad guy, too plain, too, sort of a us versus them type of thing. But that is not what is happening at all. Uh, just as a grenade to throw into the intellectual room, uh, Iran has been sending more missiles and drones into the UAE than they have Israel. Now that's something to think about, right? They are deliberately using their ring of fire strategy, as Israel calls it, to expand the war along many, many different axes. And that's also the narrative for public support, the economic attacks globally, the Straits of Hormuz being closed, which, by the way, will be open by the time the Marines get there. And just the general sense that you are grabbing the tar baby tighter and tighter and tighter. So that's the level that I look at this war.
So why do you say the Straits of Hormuz will be open soon, within the 3 weeks it'll take for the MAU to get from San Diego to the Gulf?
Well, Iran is not a bigger military power than the U.S. is, and everybody knows that. So they do a thing called the OODA loop, the OODA. The OODA loop is what fighter pilots use to determine what their adversary is going to do and then try to do it quicker to put them off, right? If you watch what Donald Trump says in the press and you actually watch what Iran does the very next day or the same day, he constantly looks like he doesn't know what's going on. Well, he does know what's going on, but he's making the wrong decisions, and then Iran is changing the metrics. So sending troops in ships to sail halfway around the world is a perfect opportunity for Iran to go, okay, open the Straits of Hormuz, and then if the Marines attack the islands to secure the straits, which can't be. I've sailed through the Straits of Hormuz. It's a very difficult place to do anything. Then we will look like fools for sending all these people out there with no war to fight.
Well, already the straits are open to Iranian shipping and shipping with Iranian oil. And on top of that, to show how topsy-turvy and contradictory this war is, the U.S. has just unsanctioned Iranian oil along with Russian oil. So
Exactly.
none of it makes any sense.
Well, it does make sense because they're using chaos as a weapon. And believe me, when you're going against a large military organization, uh, it's very easy to inject chaos. Now remember that this attack on Iran is not a surprise, right? I mean, we had a war last year in which we insisted that we destroyed their nuclear capability. And then we shifted or pivoted with Netanyahu's help to regime change, right? And most people may not know, but the Iranian regime was set up specifically to prevent regime change because it was our very first coup in 1953. And they are very good at spreading out the control in the military and the actions and the decisions. So when Donald Trump boldly proclaimed, and because Israel told him, that if we bomb and kill the Ayatollahs, people will rise up in the streets. Now, remember, they were going to do this in Iraq. That didn't happen either. So when he shifted almost daily to different strategies or different end games, and Iran is watching this and shifting their end game by expanding the war, by attacking the Gulf neighbors, by attacking the economic health of the world. And I mean, even something as simple as fertilizer not reaching farmers this April is going to have profound effects around the world.
So describe the Straits of Hormuz. You've been through the Straits of Hormuz. The U.S. is talking about maybe taking some of the small islands there. But my understanding is that even though they've been dropping bombs on the coastal emplacements on the Iranian side, it's pretty formidable. There are pretty high mountains rising right up from the shoreline.
Well, okay, so let's set the scene. The global shipping industry is not a military thing, right? Like there's basically Burmese sailors on Greek ships and these giant Supramaxes and Afromaxes have a very narrow channel. It's about a mile wide either way. So as you come into the Straits of Hormuz, you notice the mountains on the left, right? And that's Iran. And you see these islands, which are mostly flat. They have very sort of 1970s style military setups on them, and they use speedboats, right? So if they need to come out and do something, but typically people go through there unmolested. But you have to go very slow. So the straits are like a traffic jam, except they're spaced out. And on the left side, what you notice are these formidable mountains that overlook the small strait there. And you also notice that you can see everything. You know, these little islands are not that impressive, but you can see with binoculars each ship that goes through there. And there's all kinds of caves and redoubts where you can sit on the mountains if you wanted to. But at the end of the day, you know, it just takes one exocet, and in the 80s they used RPGs, you know, speedboats and RPGs to sink tankers. So the other thing is that it is probably the worst place to fight a war. And you know, I said this about Afghanistan, but I would actually prefer Afghanistan. The water temperature at surface is between 75 and 80 degrees. It's about 110 degrees in the summer, and it has about 30-40% humidity. Now, you can imagine how bad it was in Okinawa and Iwo Jima. Imagine being fully exposed, no cover, trying to take islands and people shooting at you from the hills. So it's an extremely difficult and probably fruitless endeavor.
And do you think it's going to happen? The other alternative is Hog Island, which is further into the Gulf, 500 miles into the Gulf, and you can't get into the Gulf to begin with. The U.S. Navy won't go in there, even though Trump is saying that NATO and other countries are a bunch of cowards for not doing what the U.S. Navy doesn't want to do. So how would you be able to take Hog Island?
Well, okay, first of all, Hog Island is just a depot, right? It's just an island that moves the oil from the mainland far enough out so that a ship can dock, right? You need a certain amount of depth to pull up an oil tanker. You could blow up everything on Hog Island. It wouldn't really impact anything other than the flow of Iranian oil, but that's a misstatement. That's not Iranian oil. That's Chinese oil. It's already been purchased, right? It's Indian oil. It's Singaporean oil. It's South Korean oil. This again is an escalation that I don't think Trump is going to go for, but he's making statements that don't make sense militarily. And as you know from the charge of the Light Brigade and other sort of misgotten military adventures, you're not going to send slow-moving ships up a narrow, well-defended sort of channel and hope that they get all the distance towards Iran. It won't happen.
And is there any way to deploy from Saudi Arabia?
Well, again, you're talking about a war that was fought in the 40s, you know, like these wars of attrition are not going to win the war. So fundamentally, our problem is that Iran is a nationalist state. You know, it is aligned with Russia. It is aligned with China. A lot of the drones that Iran is using are Russian versions of their Shahed. You know, a lot of the materials and support they get from China, a lot of money. So when you zoom back and you say, okay, Ian, I want you to fight this war, the first question you would ask is, why are we fighting this war? You know, what threat does Iran pose? The nuclear football has been used many, many times. I mean, last time they used it was Iraq. Remember that there was going to be a nuclear bomb and we had to do this immediately. This is getting old and tired. Secondly, if you engage in a war on the other side of the world, what's the win? What do you win? You know, if you want to do regime change, there's a very specific scientific way. I did a whole podcast on this. You know, you insert money, you insert CIA, you train up groups, you politicize, you know, ethnic minorities, and then at a certain moment, you decapitate the leadership, and then these people rise up. We did it against the Soviets. So we know how to do this. We're just not doing it. And the third question is, how much collateral damage are we causing by allowing separate wars to function? In other words, Israel has their own war. You know, they have a war in the West Bank and Gaza. They're trying to get into Lebanon and clear that up. That's not the Iran war, right? That's against Hezbollah, which is funded by Iran, which was created when Israel invaded Lebanon the last time in 1982. So these are wars unrelated to us. Secondly, you've got the Gulf, rich kids saying this agreement you made to protect us is worth nothing. We're getting hammered here. All the influencers are leaving, all the money's leaving, the condos are being sold. You can't sustain wars in these little tiny rich oil kingdoms, right? Because they get slaughtered. So there's about 4 wars going on under the guise of the Iran war, none of them pleasant.
But it seems to me in the big picture, we're losing, Russia's winning, and I'm sure China is just sitting back thinking, Trump is really weakening America, and all we can do is cheer from the sidelines.
Well, okay. So I'm a war guy. So I look at this. This is an asymmetrical war, which means that there's more than one side, there's more than one objective, and each side or each group has a reason to engage in violence. So the Gulf states are engaging in violence because they're protecting their little piggy bank, right? We are protecting them sort of because they have bases. Now, Israel, we protect Israel, but then you have to ask, well, why did Israel drag us into this? There was no imminent threat to Israel, right? So we now, as an American people, say, hey, why are we fighting these wars on behalf of other people? Nobody wins in these wars, right? These asymmetrical wars are ongoing, and they bubble up, they calm down. What we need is Congress to then say right, left, center, stop. This is madness, right? This is Mad King Donnie making arbitrary decisions, and they're being gamed every day by our opponents.
But again, the big picture in terms of, first of all, going back to Obama, there was all this idea we're going to pivot out of the Middle East in order to deal with the real threats that are in the North Pacific and China. That's always been the conventional wisdom. And for some reason or other, we get sucked back into the Middle East. And I'm sure that's a part of Netanyahu's motives, just to keep us in there. We spent, $10 trillion on what? Nothing. The failed war in Iraq, the failed war in Afghanistan, and now another one in Iran. So it looks as though this is a trap to weaken America, to drain our resources, to empty our arsenals so we have no ammunition left. And then, China and Russia and Iran and North Korea, they're all going to be laughing.
Well, 2 things. One is that we are officially in the multipolar world, which is a new world order in which America is not the number one power, but smaller, sometimes, squabbling powers can band together and tell us to get lost, right? This is what's happening right now. The second thing is we've created a government that you can buy or rent whatever you want. So Israel knows this. They pump money into our government. They elect people. They influence people. They go past the CIA. They go past the the people that sort of look at things and make decisions. They go directly to politicians. And if they have to, they go to Mar-a-Lago and they influence the president of the United States. So I think having a government that's for sale is part of our downfall. And secondly, the ease in which they can push Trump into making really bad decisions. And remember, they have groups of people that sit around and game what Trump would do when certain things happen. He's very susceptible to influence. So I think that's our problem.
So just then to go back to the war, which Trump says he's trying to wind down, but it doesn't look as if it's winding down, and certainly doesn't look as if he's in control. What's likely to happen next? Because if we venture into that neighborhood, the IRGC, the Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, have what they call the mosquito fleet of 1,000 of these little fast boats, along with disguised fishing boats. So this looks like a hornet's nest.
This is nothing new, right? These speedboats have been used. They're British designed. They're quite fast, and they used them in the last tanker war in the 80s. So this is nothing new. Look, at the end of the day, some entity, whether it's the media or the politicians, have to sit down with a blank piece of paper and say, how the hell did we get into this mess, right? Because this is a forever war. This is not a one-shot, oh, Trump says it's over, we won. This is a tar baby war. We're stuck. And every time we say, oh, we're going to go do this, Iran will do the opposite. So we're constantly wrong-footing. We're being wrong-footed into making bad decisions. And yes, it's all about degrading America's influence around the world, including removing the petrodollar, right? Because the movement of tankers that you're seeing are being paid for in Chinese currency. So this is all part of the goal of the multipolar world, to degrade us down to just sort of an angry isolationist entity. Again, I'm not a political guy. I don't know any politicians, but I encourage everyone to zoom back and not bring in their sort of alliances or their previous sort of history with, oh, we have to defend Israel, or, Iran is the bad guy, or, Saudi Arabia is our friend. They're all, it's like going to a domestic disturbance at a party on a weekend. They're all beating each other up and shooting at each other. And we're like, what the hell are we doing in the middle of this? So that's really how I look at it, as humorous as that may be.
Well, yeah, it's humorous, but the joke's on us. I thank you for joining us, Robert Young Pelton.
Thank you very much. And I did a podcast on this, so please Google my name and go on YouTube and enjoy it. So
okay, we'll do that. And
thanks,
again,
Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Robert Young Pelton, an author, filmmaker, journalist, and explorer. He's the publisher of Dangerous Magazine and has had a first-hand perspective on the war on terror from direct contact with the world's most infamous jihadi, rebel, and insurgent groups. His books include The World's Most Dangerous Places, Come Back Alive, Three Worlds Gone Mad, License to Kill, Hired Guns in the War on Terror, and his autobiography, The Adventurist. And he's working on a documentary about Jared Kushner's secret deals in the Gulf, which lined his pockets. We're going to take a brief station break and back, examining how Putin is winning the war on Ukraine so far as he prepares for a spring offensive against Ukraine, with extra revenues to pay for his war, thanks to his bootlicking friend Donald Trump.
Go straight to hell, boys. Go straight to hell, boys. Wanna join in a chorus of the Amerasian blues when it's Christmas out in Ho Chi Minh City. Kitty say, Papa, 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 Papa Sam, take me home. See me got.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Olga Lautman, a non-resident senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, who is also the creator and co-host of the Kremlin File podcast series, which features expert discussions on the Kremlin's internal affairs, global operations, and tactics used from their hybrid warfare toolkit to destabilize Western democracies. She has a Substack newsletter covering Russia, Ukraine, Eastern and Central Europe, with a focus on Russia's intelligence operations, available at olgalautman.substack.com, where her latest articles include Trump threatens broadcasters over Iran war coverage, a move straight out of Russia, and the irony of Trump demanding NATO help in the Strait of Hormuz after years of attacking the alliance. Welcome to Background Briefing, Olga Lautman.
Thank you so much.
So thanks for joining us, Olga. And so far in this war on Iran, it seems that Russia and Putin are the winners, and Putin is now being gifted a windfall by Trump and the Treasury Department. They're taking off sanctions on Russian oil, along with Iranian oil, I might add. And this money will, of course, be used by Putin in his spring offensive against Ukraine. And Trump again is praising Putin, deferring to him while trashing Zelensky. Zelensky offered counter-drone technology. They're way ahead of anybody and everybody in terms of the sophistication in drones, and yet Trump sort of dismissed Zelensky's offer as being meaningless. So I know we've seen this bad movie before, and it's hard to understand why Trump is so deferential to Putin and yet, bullies everybody else, and he's the strong man and all that, and throws his weight around and starts a war in the Middle East. But the one person that he doesn't bully in fact, he cowers in front of him, is Vladimir Putin. So any more insight? I know we've talked about this in the past, but the idea that Putin is helping Iran kill American soldiers, you would think any patriotic American president would take exception to that.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I mean, first off, you have Russia that is providing targeting intelligence to Iran, before and after satellite images reportedly, advice on how to improve targeting, which we actually have seen, because if you look at the wave of attacks, you had a lot of, attacks by Iran across the region the first week, then it started decreasing, and now you see an increase and you see the precision. So they definitely have improved in targeting. So you have Russia that is helping them to kill Americans. And by the way, this is not the first time. I am old enough to remember in 2020 when Trump would deliver the intelligence, according to New York Times, that Russia was providing bounties to the Taliban to kill American soldiers in Afghanistan. And then, more recently, a few years ago, there was actually confirmation, another investigation done by this, and confirmation, including the companies that were used to move the money to Taliban militants and whatnot. At that time, Trump called it fake news. Here you see Trump completely, ignoring the fact that Russia is participating in killing Americans, and potentially in the 13 Americans that have died. This could have been a result of Russia's information. He's ignoring this, attacking Zelensky, and giving Russia basically $150 million a day. So they're going to get upwards of $5 to $10 billion by the end of the month or within a month for oil. And this money is going to be used to kill Ukrainians. And at the same time, he's attacking Zelensky, who has sent not only drone engineers and drone experts, but is also providing counter drone technology to protect the same American soldiers that Iran and Russia are trying to kill. So, I mean, the whole thing is honestly sickening. And if you notice, on top of that, he is attacking our NATO allies. So the same NATO countries that literally were just putting together a plan a few months ago after Trump gave the whole world a scare that he's about to invade Greenland, are now supposed to come and run for a war that he started and open up the Strait of Hormuz. So you see, him using this as a pretext again to basically justify the fact that he doesn't want the United States in NATO. He doesn't want nothing to do with NATO, and frankly, that he has zero respect for this post-World War II alliance.
Well, he just called the NATO a bunch of cowards. So is he laying the groundwork for announcing he wants to pull out of NATO?
I think so, but he can't pull out of NATO, because I think that is actually one thing that Republicans, won't have the stomach to allow, because it has to go through Congress for the U.S. to officially withdraw. But he doesn't need to officially withdraw. All he has to do is what he's been doing over the past year, which is pulling troops out of Romania, drawing down troops in other parts of Europe, shifting resources outside of Europe, and basically doing everything to sabotage the alliance within, on top of the fact threatening to invade two NATO territories, one Canada, a NATO founder, and Greenland, which is protected under Denmark. So, I mean, he's already doing what he, needs to do. And this is just more justification for him to sell to his base that, you see, NATO's not here for us. I mean, NATO invoked Article 5 one time, and that was after September 11th. They had, their own citizens die to protect America in Afghanistan and Iraq. And here, I mean, it was just, last month that he was insulting them and saying that, oh, yeah, they did nothing in Afghanistan or Iraq. They basically hid in the back, which is completely a lie. So, and now he wants them to go and open the Strait of Hormuz that he, himself launched this war with Bibi. He wants NATO to come in and take care of that, so the whole thing is absurd.
So let's talk about what's happening in Russia itself, though, because as much as Putin is the winner in the Iran war, there are signs at home of dissent, and a very surprising one coming from Ilya Remeslo, who is one of the Putin's propagandists, one of his major propagandists. He led the disinformation campaign against Navalny by the Kremlin and even testified against Navalny, who, of course, was sent to a gulag and murdered there. So the fact that he's written this long piece in Telegram called 5 Reasons Why I Stopped Supporting Vladimir Putin, in which he calls Putin a war criminal and a thief and absolutely criticizes his absolutely dead-end war, and then accuses of Putin of insane, borderline, morbid craving for luxury, and finishes up his screed saying, bottom line, Vladimir Putin is not a legitimate president. Vladimir Putin must resign and be brought to trial as a war criminal and thief. And he ended his screed with the tagline, which was Navalny made famous, here we tell the truth. So what's going on?
Well, there has been several things happening, and for starters, you had this happen, and he made this post. With Russia, I have always said it's like a house of mirrors, so you never know what is actually happening. He did make this post within 24 hours. He was thrown into a mental institution in St. Petersburg, which basically Stalin started this practice. Brezhnev made good of this practice. Everyone who, questioned anything had schizophrenia and during Brezhnev days and was thrown into mental institutions. And Putin has brought back this practice a few years ago, particularly after the 2019 protest. So the reports are in a local St. Petersburg newspaper that they verified and that he was put into this mental institution. But with Russia, you never know, because they could be staging this in order to send a message for others that if anyone thinks about speaking out, that they will end up in a mental institution. They can also be doing it to flush out, the so-called traitors. The reason I say this is because this is happening against a backdrop of the past month. Russia has really started tightening on the internet in Moscow and St. Petersburg. It started in other regions last summer, and you had many regions across Russia that were suffering an internet blackout, mobile phone blackout. And now it has finally arrived to Moscow, St. Petersburg. It started a few months ago. And this is now really like they are cracking down. They have, are trying to take Telegram offline. They're basically have already pretty much, made it impossible to use WhatsApp and other popular apps and social media platforms. And now they're coming for Telegram. Plus, people are having difficulties in logging into the internet at all. I mean, it is so bad that people can't even use their navigation system and are using paper maps in order to, get around Moscow. So it could be that because maybe the Kremlin is anticipating that there will be, protest, because with Russians, they're very apathetic, but, take away the internet, especially from the younger generation, this actually may, cause them to come out in numbers and start protesting. So maybe the Kremlin is getting ahead of that. It could be that, he is really did feel this way, and it could be because of the fact that Telegram is being taken away, and this is a money source for a lot of these propagandists, and influencers, just like X and other platforms in the U.S. are money sources. And at the same time, you also have Putin, who hasn't been seen in the Kremlin for about 2 weeks. He's been giving meetings, video conferences, but physically he has not been seen in the Kremlin for 2 weeks. And with Putin, all his offices are identical. So there are probably 40, 50 offices that he has that resemble the Kremlin, identical. So, and they're in his palaces and bunkers and pretty much scattered across the country. So he has been, appearing, but just not in the Kremlin. And you had several investigative opposition outlets who took notice to that and, have been keeping an eye on that. So there is definitely something happening. At the same time, also, there are pictures coming out that there are snipers, so, around Moscow buildings, which is an unusual thing. So something clearly is afoot there inside,
So
something to monitor.
Sure, but Olga, you're saying that he has what essentially are movie sets that are replicas of his Kremlin office in various, he said 50 locations?
A few dozen. Actually,
okay.
Who did a great job. There were several Russian investigative outlets together, opposition outlets that worked with Radio Free Europe. And Radio Free Europe published an excellent investigation into this, with evidence of, all of these offices basically looking identical as the Kremlin and being scattered across the country. They published this investigation several years ago, and it is something we all assumed, that he has, these offices, because he became even more paranoid during COVID. And during COVID, I think this is when it kind of became a little bit more clear, because he was giving, speaking to Russians from his office. But people noticed that he's not in the Kremlin, and and because at that time, I mean, everyone pretty much was locked down. People began realizing that there's something there, and started investigating it, and came to the conclusion that yes, he has dozens and dozens of offices that look identical to what it looks like in the Kremlin.
But the fact that Ilya Remeslo, who was very close to the Kremlin and to Putin, and was his point man on attacking Navalny, the leader of the opposition, he even testified against Navalny in the show trial that put Navalny away in the Gulag, where he was eventually murdered. So there's no question that this guy is, this would be like, Kash Patel, one of these ludicrous Trump fanboys, suddenly turning on Trump. It's pretty remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, we'll see where it goes and how far it goes, because today you see like several videos floating of like other influencers who are like in tears that they're, that what are they going to do without the internet? So it'll be interesting to see where it goes, and if stripping people of their internet inside of Russia is finally like a catalyst for, Ilya speaking out and others. Because I mean, so many of these propagandists and military propagandists, the military bloggers, I mean, their life is on Telegram. And once you start taking Telegram away from them, and basically, preventing them from going online with Wi-Fi, without VPN. I mean, Russia is really cracking down and making it hard to circumvent it. Although they're having, interestingly enough, something that other agencies should pay attention to. They're having problems fully shutting down the internet. Unlike China that has full control, Russia, there are loopholes that are emerging where people still can break through and overwhelm Russia's security steps in shutting down the internet. But yeah, it will be interesting to see. Maybe this will be something that pushes them. We'll see what happens with Ilya. We'll see, how long he stays in the asylum, whether he comes out
Right.
and makes
It-
any kind of statements. We'll see. I mean, and how
well,
many more if others will join this route?
sure, but if he comes out of the mental institution that they threw him into, he'll come out and say how wonderful Putin is. That's how they
Yeah,
play.
yeah,
That's
exactly. It'll be
that's how it
interesting to
works.
see.
But
Yep.
just in closing, though, does this indicate that there are more people out there like Ilya who are finally speaking out about what a catastrophe Putin has been for Russia?
I'm sure that there are, people who think this. We saw the same thing happen with Strelkov, who was key in Russia's 2014 invasion. So I'm sure he also came out. He's in jail right now for already a few years after coming out and criticizing Putin's full-scale invasion and basically saying that it's a complete show and he really needs to resign over what he's done to the country. He's in jail for a few years, but I mean, it could be, that more and more start stepping out and saying something. We'll see.
Well,
On another hand, if you have a few minutes, there is another interesting thing happening with Russia's security services, their foreign intelligence services, in an article that came out in Washington Post, that they were preparing an operation to basically stage an assassination attempt on Orban in order to tilt the election for him, because Russia's security services right now are inside of Hungary. Interestingly, J.D. Vance is going there also to support Orban, so he'll be working closely, I guess, with security services. I don't know, but
right.
they're in Hungary helping try to rig this election, and the polling is so bad for Orban that they floated basically staging an assassination attempt in order to try to lift his poll numbers and popularity.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that, and I thank you for joining us, Olga. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And again, I've been speaking with Olga Lautman, who's a non-resident senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, who was also the creator and co-host of the Kremlin File podcast series, which features expert discussions on the Kremlin's internal affairs, global operations, and tactics used from their hybrid warfare toolkit. And she has a Substack, olgalautman.substack.com, where her latest articles include Trump threatens broadcasters over Iran war coverage, a move straight out of Russia, and the irony of Trump demanding NATO help in the Strait of Hormuz after years attacking the alliance. We're going to take a brief station break, back with an assessment of what kind of New Year's celebration is going on in Iran, with the Nowruz holiday overshadowed by war as Iranians hunker down while running out of food and medicine under a death threat from their own government not to go outside.
Птах в небесах безпілотником вітру шукає і знов, світить в тумані вікно, тиша примарна, фрази короткі, безвість нечутно течуть, серце надії печуть, що все не марно, десь там ти мене ждеш, мамо, як відгримить.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now, Nader Hashemi, the director of the Alawied Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding and an associate professor of Middle East and Islamic politics at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, a non-resident fellow at Democracy for the Arab World Now. He's the author of The People Reloaded, The Green Movement and the Struggle for Iran's Future, and Sectarianization, Mapping the New Politics of the Middle East. Welcome to Background Briefing, Nader Hashemi.
Thanks for the invite, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And on Friday and over this weekend, Iranians around the world are celebrating Nowruz, but I take it the celebrations underway in Iran itself are pretty much overshadowed, clearly, by this war. What are you hearing from friends and relatives, as much as they can communicate with the outside world, about how Iranians feel in this holiday that's very important to them as you celebrate spring?
Well, first point is that it's very difficult to get in touch with friends and relatives in Iran because the internet is down, and the ability to phone someone in Iran or receive a phone call is extremely limited. But we are getting reports out of Iran, and it's a very grim and dark moment because Iranians, broadly speaking, are caught between a rock and a hard place, between a very brutal internal regime with a horrific human rights record, and on the outside, attacked by two of the most unsavory politicians in the world today, Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, who have unleashed this attack on Iran with seemingly no end in sight. I just want to read, Ian, to you two paragraphs from the Financial Times correspondent who actually is based in Iran. She's actually one of the best journalists, and I recommend people follow her reporting on Iran. Her name is Najmeh Bozorgmer. And speaking to the question you just asked me, today she wrote the following words, quote, "There's nothing abstract about fear. In the heaviest strikes, every cell in your body shakes. The sound does not feel external. It travels through you as if your bones themselves are echoing. In those moments, the mind has a question. Is this the one? And worse still, what if I survive, but someone I love does not? What if we all survive, only to step outside and find that the home that held our lives together is now gone?" And I think that's the mood that I think captures what many people in Iran are feeling today at this moment.
So we and the Israelis are bombing the Iranian people in order to free them.
Well, yeah, that's the argument. But of course, we know that's the propaganda excuse, because if you follow what Donald Trump was hoping to do right from the beginning of this so-called excursion, to quote him, is he really wanted to pull Venezuela on Iran. There was no interest in the Iranian people, although he justified the attack by claiming this is your moment of freedom, come and claim it. You might not have another chance in generations, he said. But we really know that from Donald Trump's own words that he was hoping to find another person like Rodriguez who would effectively capitulate to Trump's demands, and Trump could take the oil. That clearly didn't happen. And so all of this, talk about liberating the Iranian people, I think, was largely a propaganda exercise to justify this morally indefensible war. And again, when it's all said and done, the big losers are going to be the people of Iran. So I don't buy that rhetoric for 1 second. No one should.
Well, it doesn't look like the U.S. military is engaged in a regime change strategy, and not that there's any real strategy going on here, but it does seem that to some extent the Israelis are engaged in a regime change strategy, because they keep striking Revolutionary Guard Corps facilities, headquarters, barracks, weapon storages, along with Basij militia weapon storage and barracks and garages where they keep the motorcycles, etc. And even roadblocks are being hit. Is that a discernible strategy? And then, of course, the follow-up question would be, is that ever going to work?
Well, I don't think it's going to work, and we know it's not going to work because there's a lot of scholarship and empirical evidence that we have that speaks specifically to this issue. I'm sure or some of your listeners know, Ian, the work of the University of Chicago political scientist Robert Pape, who happens to be...
we had him on at the beginning of this war, yeah.
Oh, wonderful, yeah. So he's the leading expert who's actually, who studied every single case in human history since World War I until the present. And he's gone on record by saying there's not one example, he emphasizes, where a deeply entrenched authoritarian regime has been toppled by an external bombing campaign. In fact, what happens is that, as we're seeing now in Iran, nationalism inevitably kicks in. People who are on the fence saying, look, we might not like this regime, but we certainly don't want to be bombed by external powers. And so ironically, the regime I would argue, is actually being emboldened, not weakened, which raises the question, why is Israel persisting in this decapitation strategy? I think they're under the illusion, based on a lot of really bad advice that they're getting from some of these, right-wing MAGA Republican and pro-Israel think tanks in Washington, like this organization called, it's known by the acronym FDD, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, that, this regime just needs to be hit really hard and then the whole thing will crumble, like we saw in Libya or like we saw in, Saddam Hussein's Iraq. Iran's authoritarian system is very different. It's deeply entrenched, it's institutionalized, there's many layers to it. It has a deep ideological core. And so you assassinate the supreme leader, someone else takes his place. You assassinate senior military commanders, and there's like 5 or 6 layers of people willing to take their place. And Iran still has the ability, as we're seeing as we enter the 4th week, to hit back and to demonstrate that it does have an ability to survive this onslaught. So I think the entire Israeli strategy of regime change has backfired. And what's interesting to note, Ian, is on the very first day of the war, people forget this, the Israelis hit a location in Pasteur Street in central Tehran. That happens to be the location where the opposition leader, Amir Hossein Mousavi, was being held under house arrest, which raises the question, why are you hitting the home of an opposition leader who's been fighting for democracy? It shows that Israel has zero interest in democracy. They're trying to assassinate not just regime leaders, but also those independent opposition figures within Iran who might pose a possible sort of alternative to this regime if there's ever an opening, so that, to pave the way for some sort of pro-American or pro-Israel figure like, the discredited son of the former dictator Reza Pahlavi to come to Iran in some scenario and reclaim authority. So this entire operation, I think, doesn't stand up to scrutiny. It has nothing to do with, freeing the people of Iran. It's actually leading to the opposite results.
Well, but now you have, inside the MAGA right wing, you've got kind of the constituency, I'd call it the blame it on the Jews constituency, the Tucker Carlsons. And there's a sort of ugly kind of anti-Semitism emerging there, along with Nick Fuentes and others. And in Israel itself, as bad as Netanyahu is, and here in the United States, as bad as Donald Trump is, Trump's only managed to have his thugs kill a handful of Americans in the streets. In Netanyahu's Israel, they haven't been killing people in the streets, except if you're on the West Bank and if you're a Palestinian, it's open season. Whereas on the Iranian side, this government had just mowed down thousands of its own people in the streets, absolutely mercilessly and ruthlessly. So how do you give aid and comfort to the Iranian people and its diaspora here in Los Angeles, for example? I mean, you've got to... I'm sympathetic to the fact that there has to be some kind of regime change. Not that I agree with anything that's happening now. So how do you navigate that, Nader?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I actually just wrote a piece on this topic. It's called The Road to Democracy in Iran. And the argument that I make is that for democracy to have a chance in terms of toppling a deeply entrenched authoritarian regime, it not only requires suitable internal social conditions, but it also requires suitable external conditions. And what I mean by that is external social and political conditions that are defined by war or the threat of war produces the opposite result internally in terms of, helping democratic forces. It actually emboldens hardliners, conservatives, and people who are security minded. It allows them to sort of shift the focus of politics away from internal accountability, away from questions of democracy and human rights, and to play the national security card, and then to weaponize nationalism and patriotism to paint everyone domestically as an opponent and as a traitor during times of war. So the point here is that those of us who really care about the future of Iran, the Iranian people, especially those of us living in the United States, I think what we should be focused on, and this is a tall order, is shifting U.S. foreign policy in a way that's much more constructive and it's much more geared towards creating a better regional and international context that removes the threat of war, which will then allow Iranian democratic forces to have a better chance of fighting the regime. And I'm speaking specifically about getting back, if possible, to the 2015 period when there was a nuclear agreement known as the JCPOA. It was precisely at that moment when the agreement was signed that Iranian democratic forces were elated. They came into the street, they were celebrating because they knew that the external threat of war had been removed, that the prospects of lifting sanctions were very real, allowing the middle class to thrive, and that there would be a greater opportunity, a pathway that could possibly open up doors to take on this regime and then, defeat it. You can't do that when there's a constant threat of war hanging over Iran. And so in many ways, this war that we're seeing right now plays into the ideological narrative of Iranian hardliners who are exploiting themes of nationalism to tell people in Iran, see, we are under threat from these external actors, these enemies. They don't care about us. They're attacking our cultural and heritage sites. They're killing innocent civilians. So that's, I think, the focus that I think we have some control over. Of course, this is going to have to wait to another president because there's no hope with this current, president and his gangster regime in power and his gangster ally in Israel. But I think if we're serious about a long-term set of policy changes that can give the people of Iran a fighting chance, we've got to change that external context. And that would be going back to something similar to the 2015 moment where I think there was an opportunity. I think there was some hope there. Now that has passed, that ship has sailed, but I think there's some lessons there for all of us to learn in terms of how we can best help the people of Iran.
So what do you think then is the exit strategy here? Trump is already saying he's going to wind it down, but at the same time they're sending more Marines. So it's hard to know, and he changes his mind and operates on his whims in any case, and he clearly doesn't know what he's doing. He never has. In his first presidency, he didn't know what he was doing, and it's even worse in his second presidency. So forget about it. But nevertheless, there's pressure from the rest of the world. Most of all, there's pressure at the gas pump, political pressure on the Republicans. Something has to give. What do you think's going to happen?
It's not clear. I think one thing that we should learn from this moment is we have to stop paying attention to what Trump says, because he changes his mind literally, every day. There's no insight to be gained there. I think we should be focusing on what the United States is actually doing, what it seems like it's going to try and do, because it has no plan. And a lot of this seems to be driven by, Netanyahu's advice to Donald Trump. He seems like he's going to try and take over Harg Island, that island in the Persian Gulf where most of Iran's oil is produced and shipped from. That's what I'm hearing. There was a big piece in Politico the other day that talked about this. Trump is ramping up, Marines, sending them to the region. He was hoping to get a Venezuela type scenario. That was his plan A. He had no plan B. And now he's stuck in effectively a quagmire. And Iran is the one that's sort of determining now the pace and the duration of this war. So my own reading is that because Trump can't claim an easy victory, he's boxed in, that we're headed for more war. And the only strategy he seems to have is to keep bombing Iran, hoping that something's going to give. And it's not going to give in terms of what Trump wants or Netanyahu wants. It's just going to perpetuate this conflict. So if you were to ask me today, Ian, my reading of what's happening is that we're still a long way away from any off-ramp. I think this is going to escalate before there's a chance of this de-escalating. I know it's a grim, prognosis here, but I'm trying to be as honest and accurate as possible.
Well, our first guest on today's program said that the Iranians have fired more missiles and drones at the UAE than they have at Israel. So this is a very different war. These are supposedly America's allies that we've dragged into this war. And so you've got Israel dragging America into the war, and you've got America dragging the Gulf into the war.
No, absolutely. I think this is a game changer, Ian. I think the Middle East regional order is completely going to have to be rethought, recalculated. There's so many things to talk about here, but just like one thing, you mentioned the UAE. The UAE's whole brand name reputation was that this is an island of stability in the Middle East. It's an open place. If you were a Russian oligarch or if you were a practicing Muslim or anything in between, you could come here and have a good time and, bring your family, and it would be a safe place to visit. That's all gone out the door. Who's going to invest in the UAE anymore? the relationship that UAE had with the United States was very much premised on this idea that there would be a security relationship. But it's clear that the United States can't protect these Gulf allies. And all of this has to do with Iran's posture in the region, Iran's sense of insecurity. They're making an argument that if we can't live in this region, no one can. So I think there's just a lot of uncertainty going forward. I can't see things going back to what they were. And unfortunately, the more this war drags on, the more the economy of this region goes down the tubes, and so does the global economy. So this is a disaster of enormous proportions. We of course, we expected this from Donald Trump, right? Because he has no sense of history or responsibility or understanding of international relations. But, unfortunately, this is where we are, Ian. It's a disaster in the making, and unfortunately, it looks like there's more to come.
Well, you can add a couple more adjectives to Trump. He's also cruel and sadistic. He doesn't care about our kids and grandkids. He wants the world to be poisoned, and he doesn't believe in global warming, and he only believes in oil companies. And he's not doing it. Well, the U.S. oil companies are making out like bandits. They're making a fortune. And
agree.
And his buddy Putin is making out like bandits.
Totally. I tell my students at Georgetown, this congressional election in November really matters. We have to get our democratic house in order. Not only is it good for us here domestically, but look what happens to the rest of the world when someone like Donald Trump enters the White House. It's a disaster for everyone. So in that sense, we have some ability here in the United States to try and stop this train wreck before all of us are consumed by it. So there's a lot of work we all have to do. And I think we have to focus on November, and that hopefully will set the stage then for the next presidential election. But Donald Trump can do a lot of damage between now and the next presidential election. So God help us all, Ian.
Well, Nader Hashemi, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thanks, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Nader Hashemi. He's the director of the Alawite Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding and an associate professor of Middle East and Islamic politics at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. A non-resident fellow at Democracy for the Arab World Now. He's the author of The People Reloaded, The Green Movement of the Struggle for Iran's Future, and Sectarianization, Mapping the New Politics of the Middle East. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
One more